It's Thursday of Holy Week, and we encounter one of the more significant themes in all of the scriptures, and that's the theme of blessing and curse, or salvation through judgment. And Passover was the hugest Jewish feast of the year. 100,000 people are in Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover, to pay their homage, to worship God. And Jesus desires to have this Passover meal with his disciples, but near the end of it, he institutes something called the Lord's Supper. And the language of the Lord's Supper is very telling. And he says, as they were eating, he took bread, and after blessing it, broke it and gave it to them and said, "This is my body." And he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank of it. And he said to them, "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many." And what Jesus is saying there, when you think of this covenant, the language is, of course, it's a new covenant that God is instituting here through Christ. The old covenant was one where God's people are making vows and promises saying, all this we will do, all this we will obey, all this we will do and honor you. And of course they don't, and they rebel, and they're judged and cast out of the promised land by the Assyrians and Babylonians, and even now at this time, as they're celebrating the Passover meal, they're under Roman occupation. They're still under God's curse for their faithlessness. And the hope of all this we will do is a dead-end street. It's a street that leads only to God's judgment and condemnation, because we can never do enough. And so when Jesus institutes the Lord's Supper, he's basically saying, "This is my body given for you." The bread points to the body of Christ that is true humanity in every way. The blood points to the blood of the covenant that's poured out for the forgiveness of sins. Because of all this that we haven't done, he bears the punishment on the cross for that. And all this that God requires of us, he lives that and obeys that in his body, in his soul, for us completely. And so what he's saying to the disciples is, all this I have done for you. Receive it, take it by faith, receive me by faith. And then it's really a picture of what he's going to do on the cross. It's a gospel picture, the Lord's Supper. And that Passover meal was rather interesting because it pointed to a great curse. There was one who God would pass over, and those who obeyed in the Old Testament, in the book of Exodus, of God's people, they'd put blood on the side of the doors and on the doorposts. And God saw that as a sign and really hovered over those houses while the destroyer passed over and struck down the firstborn there in Egypt. And what's happening with this Lord's Supper meal is God's wrath is not passing over Christ, but is falling upon Christ on the cross. And all who look to Jesus, in a sense, are taking refuge and fleeing and clinging to Christ, who shelters them from the judgment of God as he takes it upon himself, that they might be saved and forgiven and blessed. Be blessed.